name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. First off, thank you to all of you who are with us this evening on this start of a journey over the next few days. My name is Salim Bimji. I'll be the MC for this evening, for this program. And as we had the program on the screen, we've again started a bit early tonight. So we're going to start with a bit of a recitation of the Holy Quran. And we'll have that recited in Arabic by Brother Ali. And we'll also have the English translation presented on screen. And he'll also read over the English translation. So I'll ask Brother Ali to come forward and begin with the recitation of the Noble Quran.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum. So we will recite from chapter 9, which is the chapter Tawbah, which is the repent, verses 111 and 112. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله اشترى من المؤمنين أنفسهم وأموالهم إن الله اشترى من المؤمنين أنفسهم وأموالهم بأن لهم الجنة يقاتلون في سبيل الله فيقتلون ويقتلون وعدا عليه حقا في التوراة والإنجيل والقرآن ومن أوفى بعهده من الله فاستبشروا ببيعكم الذي بايعتم وذلك هو الفوز العظيم. التائبون العابدون الحامدون السائحون الراكعون الساجدون الراكعون الساجدون الآمرون بالمعروف والناهون عن المنكر والحافظون لحدود الله وبشر المؤمنين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات اللهم صل على Muhammad. Of course, I read it from the translation that I have on my cell phone, which will be close. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the merciful. Indeed, Allah, which is God, has purchased from the believers their lives and their properties. In exchange for that, they will have paradise. They fight in the cause of Allah, so they kill and are killed. It's a true promise upon him in the Torah and the Gospel and the Quran. And who is truer to his covenant than Allah? So rejoice in your transaction which you have contracted, and it is that which is the great attainment. And the second verse says, such believers are repentant, the worshippers, the praisers of Allah, the travelers for his cause, those who bow and prostrate in prayers, those who enjoin what's right and forbid what is wrong, and those who observe the limits set by Allah and give good tidings to the believers. Salawat bar Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala
Thank you very much, Brother Ali. Before we go on to begin for the program and to discuss a bit about the theme as the introduction, I wanted to take this opportunity to invite the President of the ISIA, Brother Farid Dalla, to come up and say a few words and to inaugurate this program. Brother Farid Dalla, please.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Sheikh Salim, Pastor Doug Klassen, Sheikh Mohammad Ali Shomali, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Salamun Alaikum. Peace be upon you. As the President of ISIA of Edmonton and the member of the ISIA Outreach Group, it is a pleasure for me to welcome you all in this interfaith dialogue being held here at the ISIA. I'm very grateful to you, Pastor Doug Klassen and Sheikh Mohammad Ali Shomali, for taking time off your busy schedule in joining us in this interfaith dialogue. I also wish to thank Donna of the Common Word of Alberta for giving us the opportunity to co-host this event here at ISIA. It is also an honor to welcome representatives from various faith groups, including members of the Mennonite Church, Anglican Church, ISIA members, and all other groups present here today. The discussion theme of today is the concept of self-sacrifice for faith communities as embodied by Imam Hussein and Prophet Jesus, followed by the Q&A session. I wish you all a most enlightening evening with interesting and stimulating discussions and exchange of knowledge from two friends, two faiths, so that we can together envisage the coexistence of various faith groups in this great nation and the global village. We thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to working together with various faith groups. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So just as a preamble and an introduction for this evening's program, as the flyer mentioned, as the email had mentioned on it, that the theme of the overall program that will be going on over this entire week from today until next Monday is Two Friends, Two Faiths, a series of diverse discussions with the religious scholars, with the two religious scholars that we have. And the inauguration program is this evening that we are all present in which we want to look at the concept and the theme of self-sacrifice for faith communities as embodied by two specific individuals, Imam Hussein and Prophet Jesus. One of the reasons why we came up with this theme, and to give you a brief background on who Imam Hussein is for those who have not been acquainted with Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein was the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. He was the second-born grandson to the Prophet Muhammad from his daughter Fatima Zahra and her husband Ali, the son of Abu Talib. And he plays a very prominent role in the Shia ideology and in Muslim ideology on a whole, most notably because of his stand that he took. Over 1,370 years ago, he took a stand against the corrupt government of his time, and basically he launched a movement which ended up resulting in him being martyred, being killed in one of the most lopsided battles of history, where him and his family of around 72 individuals were attacked by an army of over 30,000 warriors. And his family, he himself, all of the 99% of the males from his family were killed. They were decapitated. The family was basically, the remaining family members, they were traumatized in this entire event. They went through much difficulties and challenges after the sacrifice, which ultimately culminated in them obviously having, spawning a movement within Shia theology and in Muslims in general. And so his sacrifice is something which Muslims around the world continue to commemorate. And so when you look at our hall today and all the black cloth and the writings in Arabic, this is a continuation where we commemorate this tragedy every year. And it has been going on since the actual event occurred, again, over 1,300 years ago. And so Muslims around the world, we commemorate this event. We commemorate the sacrifice of Hussein and his family, and we draw inspiration and lessons from it for our own lives on how to become better believers, better human beings, and how to learn the spirit of self-sacrifice within our own personal life. And obviously also for the Muslim community is our understanding of Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him. As a Muslim cannot be a Muslim unless we attest to the fact that Jesus is one of the messengers sent by God. And we recognize many of the challenges that Prophet Jesus faced in his life, the opposition to his message, the way he was treated by the people around him. And although we stop and we don't agree with the crucifixion of Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, but short of that, we recognize the fact that he also sacrificed much in the way of God to promote the mission and the message that God has sent him with. And so it's in that vein that we have this gathering this evening, where our two distinguished scholars and speakers will enlighten us on this concept of self-sacrifice. For us as members of a faith community, as embodied in these two noble personalities, which were both sent by God for the guidance of humanity, both Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Mohammad, and also that of Prophet Jesus, one of the greatest messengers that God has sent upon this earth. We'll begin this evening by having our respected guest, Pastor Doug Klassen, speak to us on the topic. To give you a brief biography of the pastor, and I'll just put that up on the screen as well. Pastor Doug Klassen was born near Vineland, Ontario, and raised in a Mennonite family. He studied at the Canadian Mennonite Bible College, now the Canadian Mennonite University in Winnipeg, and he completed his Bachelor of Theology and took his first pastoral assignment in St. Catharines, Ontario. From there, he moved with his family, his wife and children, to serve in a local church in Winnipeg. And since the year 2000, he had another move, and he now is in Calgary, as a senior pastor at the Foothills Mennonite Church. And he's also currently engaged in graduate studies part-time at the Canadian Mennonite University. So we'd like to welcome Pastor Doug Klassen up to speak for the next 30 minutes or so, and to hear his words of wisdom on this timely topic for all of us who are here today. Let us welcome the pastor up front, please. With one salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You don't have a PowerPoint or anything? No, I don't. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I won't go after your time. If there are any ladies who are uncomfortable on the floor, if you need chairs, just put up a hand. We do have extra chairs. If not, if you're okay, that's great. But if you do need chairs, please just let one of us know, or one of the volunteers, and we can definitely provide you with a chair.
They might not be used to sitting.
Okay. I am very thankful to be here this evening, thankful for the privilege to speak. In Winnipeg last June, when I sat in a class with Dr. Huebner and Dr. Shomali at the Canadian School of Peacebuilding, little did I know that a few months later we would be here in this situation. What a privilege! It is a privilege to be here and to speak. First, I need to say that I am sad about two things. First, I'm not nearly as well versed in theology as Dr. Huebner is, and I wish you could have heard him speak instead of me. His knowledge and wisdom is far greater than mine. Second, though, Dr. Huebner and Dr. Shomali, when I observed them speaking together this summer in Winnipeg, I could see that they were truly friends. And I believe that friendship enhances these types of dialogues because it enables us to let down our guard and to receive what the other is saying. But I assure you that I come with the aim of friendship and peaceful understanding as well. I'm thankful for the topic that was chosen this evening. Sometimes interfaith dialogue, common ground topics aren't easily found. Though there are many demonstrations of self-sacrifice in the Bible, we believe that the best example we have is what has been shown to us in the ministry and life, death, and ministry of Jesus Christ. So I plan to give examples from his life that are written in the Bible, then also to talk about the way of self-sacrifice that has been carried forward by the Christian church since the time of Jesus' ministry, though at times it has not always been very visible. I'm not a seasoned lecturer, so I plan to do this more in a narrative or story form to illustrate the way of self-sacrifice, both in what Jesus taught and also in how he lived, all the way to the cross. I do pray that the words that are spoken here this evening and the meditations of our minds and hearts may be acceptable and pleasing to God, our Creator, our Redeemer, and Sustainer. Large portions of the Old Testament tell of the Hebrew people's life and struggles with foreign powers. Emerging from their suffering are the hopes for a Messiah, one who will deliver them from tyranny and from suffering. The Old Testament prophets like Isaiah spoke of God's vengeance coming. The psalmists talk about God bringing devastations upon the earth. And yet, when Jesus quotes the prophets and the Psalms, he omits what they are saying about God being violent with any part of God's creation. People believed that God would come in violence to defeat enemies and free his people once and for all. Even John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, who prepared the way for him, believed this as well. When he saw Jesus coming, he said, "His winnowing fork is in his hand. He will clear the threshing floor and will gather his wheat into the granary, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire." Yet when Jesus came to the river for baptism, the Spirit of God descended upon him like a dove, a symbol of peace. After some months, maybe even years in ministry, Jesus was walking with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Mark 8 records the conversation where Jesus says to his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "Some say that you are John the Baptist, others say that you are Elijah, and still others say that you are one of the prophets." Then he asked them, "Well, who do you say that I am?" And his disciple Peter said to him, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus sternly ordered his disciples not to tell anyone. And the reason he did that was because everyone was expecting that when God's Messiah would come, he would come in great violence and vengeance and would destroy all of God's enemies in rage and terror. But then Mark chapter 8 verse 31 continues, and it says that Jesus began to teach them that he must undergo great suffering. He must be rejected by all of the religious elders and the scribes and the Pharisees, and then he would be killed, and after 3 days he would rise again. He said this quite openly to them, and Peter, the most prominent disciple of his, took Jesus aside, and he began to rebuke him for what he said. But Jesus turned back to his disciples, and he rebuked Peter, saying to him, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." And then Jesus turned to the crowd, and he said, "If any of you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up the cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it." And as we read further, we notice that these words were very disturbing to the disciples. They still didn't really understand him. 2 chapters later, in Mark 10, verse 35 and following, his disciples James and John came forward to him and said, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." When the other disciples heard this conversation going on, they became very angry with James and John. We think they were jealous. So Jesus spoke to them all, and he said, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to become first among you must be the slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." From then on, the Bible tells us that he set his face for Jerusalem, even though he knew that if he went to Jerusalem, he would die there. His disciples were afraid, but they followed him. They still didn't understand what he was talking about because they had been taught since they were very young that God's Messiah would redeem his people in a great battle against their enemies. When Jesus entered into Jerusalem, many of the people thought this as well. Years before, 150 years before, Judas Maccabeus, a renowned Jewish warrior, rode back into Jerusalem on a war horse after victory over the Romans. When Jesus was coming, they expected the same, yet Jesus came in on a donkey, as prophesied by Zechariah in chapter 9, verse 9. He said, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And that is exactly how Jesus came into Jerusalem. People were tearing down palm branches and laying down coats as they did for Judas Maccabeus. Yet Jesus came in on a donkey, humbly. The people were yelling, though, Hosanna, Hosanna, which means save us, save now. And he was coming to save them, we believe. But the path he was taking was the path of suffering, not the path of war and destruction of the enemy. Just days later, Jesus knew that his suffering was to increase greatly and that he would soon die. So he chose to celebrate the Passover with his disciples. The Christian church calls this the Last Supper. And before the meal began, Jesus assumed the role of a servant. Normally, a servant would wash the feet of the guests shortly after the guests arrived. But Jesus took the towel and took the servant's place. He also took a basin of water, and he knelt down by each disciple to wash their feet. In John chapter 13, we read the story of Jesus coming then to the disciple Peter to wash Peter's feet. And Peter looked at Jesus and he said, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus answered him, you do not know what I am doing, but later you will understand. And then Peter said to him, you will never wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, unless I wash you, you have no share with me. Then Peter replied, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. And the story continues saying how Jesus broke bread with them and told them to remember this meal by sharing bread and wine with each other to remember him. At this meal there were 4 cups of wine. Luke 22, verse 20 tells us that after supper, he took a cup and spoke to his disciples and said this cup was a symbol now for the new covenant between God and God's people. The new covenant would be that God would dwell with his people. But very interestingly, once that cup was consumed, Jesus and his disciples went out to the Mount of Olives. The 4th cup had not been consumed yet. However, Jesus had not forgotten about this cup, because several verses later he is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he prays, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. The 4th cup is the cup of suffering. It is the cup that symbolizes the ongoing suffering of the people in the world. Jesus asked God if he could avoid further suffering, but then said, if it is your will, God, I will go to my death. A short time later, a mob came to the garden. Among them were some of the temple guard, but also one of his disciples named Judas. Judas was a zealot. Zealots were a rebel group of the people that wanted a violent Messiah to overthrow the Romans. Though we don't know Judas's motives for certain, many think that he still thought that Jesus would sooner or later abandon the way of suffering and conquer Rome through violence. So Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, and the mob led him away from the garden under arrest. Out of fear, one of the disciples drew a sword and cut off the ear of someone in the mob. But Jesus shouted, "No more of this." And he touched the ear of the wounded man, and he healed it. And from there, Jesus went peacefully with them, and as they led him to the high priest's house. At this point, most of Jesus' disciples then had abandoned him. But at the high priest's house, they held a trial for him. They questioned him, and they beat him when they didn't like his answers, yet he did not fight back. At dawn, they took him to the palace of Pontius Pilate to try and have him put to death. Pilate began to question him, but could find no fault in him. So to try and keep the crowd calm, he sent Jesus away to be flogged. And during the flogging and the mocking, Jesus did not resist. When he was brought back to Pilate, Pilate said to him, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave no answer. Pilate finally said to him, "Do you refuse to answer me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and the power to crucify you?" But Jesus replied, saying, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given to you from above." Pilate again tried a way to free Jesus, but eventually gave over to the will of the crowd. And Jesus was taken out to a place called Golgotha, the place of the skull, where he was crucified with 2 others on either side of him. The suffering for Jesus was not over yet, though. While he was on the cross, one of the criminals being crucified beside him said to him, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and save us." The criminal on the other side, though, said, "Do you not fear God? We are guilty, but this man has done nothing wrong." After that, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." And a jar full of sour wine was standing there, so they put a sponge into the wine and put it on a branch of hyssop, and they held it to his mouth. And when he received the wine, he said, "It is finished." And he bowed and gave up his spirit. Because the Passover was soon to begin, the soldiers were sent to break the legs of those who were on the crosses so that they would die quickly, and their bodies could be removed before the Passover started. Seeing that Jesus had already given up his spirit, they pierced his side, and out of his side came blood and water. Blood and water have become the 2 main symbols or sacraments for the Christian church. The blood reminds the church of Jesus' suffering, and the water reminds the church that we are baptized into his suffering. For the first 300 years after this event, most of the followers of Jesus believe that to follow God faithfully, you follow the example of Jesus. That is how the Christian church lived. The Apostle Paul, who became the first writer of Christian theology, said that many people should seek to imitate Jesus, and if they did that, they would be faithful to God. And this, for Paul, included a lot of suffering. This imitation included treating people the way Jesus treated people. It included providing for others, showing love to people who had been marginalized by those in power. In the early church, people brought food and brought possessions to share with those who were in need. Ultimately, it could mean that you were prepared to lose your life for your loyalty to the way of Jesus in extreme cases. For example, the story is told of Maximilianus, a young man from North Africa who lived in the 3rd century. On his 21st birthday, his father gave him a military coat. And his father told him that he'd already spoken to the army recruiter about him and that Maximilianus will have an excellent career as a soldier. But Maximilianus was devastated. He looks to his father and he says, "As you know, I have become a Christian, My Lord bids me to love my enemies. How can I become a soldier? It is impossible. And his father was deeply grieved because he knew that the death penalty awaited those who refused to serve in the army. They went to see the military recruiter, but the recruiter was unable to get Maximilianus to change his mind. And at that moment, Maximilianus was taken into custody and he was executed the next day. Many Christians in the first 300 years after Jesus died at the hands of the Roman Empire also died because their allegiance was to God before it was to Rome. And this allegiance was to live a life following the self-sacrifice of Jesus, even if it meant death. But in the year 313, Emperor Constantine produced the Edict of Milan, whereby he declared the acceptance of Christianity into the Roman Empire. Suddenly, Christian identity changed. Many people suddenly became Christian without really knowing what it was about. Pagan priests switched to becoming Christian priests without an understanding of the essence of Jesus' way of sacrificial living. Consequently, much of what Jesus taught his disciples ceased to be practiced, and those who were in power had no concept of what Jesus meant when he talked about living as a servant to others, putting yourself last instead of first, laying down your life for your friend, refusing the sword even if it meant your own death. And this preference for the ways of the world, including the sword, carried on for hundreds of years by the majority of the Christian population. There were small groups, however, mostly in monasteries, who remembered more of Jesus than just his death on the cross for the sin of humanity. They also remembered his life, his teaching, and his ministry. 500 years ago, almost to the day, actually on next Tuesday marks the day, Martin Luther, who was a monk and a theologian, began the Protestant Reformation by nailing a piece of paper with 95 complaints against the church on the door of a church in Wittenberg, Germany. His work and his writings spawned many others to write and rebel as well. Some of the more radical ones became known as the Anabaptists. They rejected the church's initiation rites for babies and said that a person should only be baptized and should only be considered a Christian when they made a commitment to follow Jesus in their daily living as adults. A baby cannot make that decision, they argued. This commitment to Christ included embracing all of his teaching and living them out as best as they could. And it even meant yielding your life if that is what needed to happen. The Roman Catholic Church at the time, it has changed a lot since, but the Roman Catholic Church at the time reacted very, very violently to the Anabaptist movement. The story is told, for example, of a man named Dirk Willems, who was captured and jailed and tortured for being an Anabaptist. This was common. Willems, though, was able to escape over the prison wall, but a guard ran after him. And Willems ran across some thin ice on a pond, and he got to the other side. While the guard was running after him, though, the guard fell through. The guard pleaded for help from Willems, and Willems, remembering the command of Jesus to love your enemies, he stopped running, he turned around, and he went back out onto the ice, and he rescued the guard and pulled him to safety. The guard supervisor, though, was watching from the shoreline, and he ordered that Willems be arrested again. And so he was, and he was taken back to prison. He was put on trial and found guilty for being an Anabaptist. All of his property was confiscated, and he was burned at the stake. Hundreds of Anabaptists died in the hands of the government because the Anabaptists refused to take part in anything that was not cohesive with what Jesus said or how he lived and died. Men were most often burned alive while tied to a stake, and women were often drowned, though there were exceptions. The Mennonites traced their beginnings back to a leader named Menno Simons. Menno Simons was a Catholic monk and a priest who came across the writings of Martin Luther. Those writings and some interactions with the Anabaptists convinced him to leave the priesthood and to join the Anabaptist movement. He was very useful to the Anabaptists because he was a good writer and he became a very good theologian. His prolific writing was a lot of help to form the movement in those early years. But moving to the Anabaptist group also involved a great deal of self-sacrifice as well. He left a life of privilege and high pay to live in a life of poverty, and he was constantly on the move because the authorities wanted to kill him. The Mennonites have carried on since that time, though it has not been easy. The Mennonite groups that were once in the area of Switzerland were not allowed to possess land, so they found life very difficult. Eventually, many of them came to what is now Pennsylvania and began to farm there and farm peacefully. Mennonites that were up in the Netherlands, though, where Menno Simons was from, eventually had to leave when the Netherlands went to war against a different country because the king demanded that they join the army. But they said that if Jesus is Lord, then we must love our enemies, even if that means leaving all that we have and all that we own, and they had to leave. So from there they went to Prussia, what is today Poland, and after some years there, they had to leave again because that king went to war and they were forced to join the army, but they refused. They were welcomed in the Ukraine, largely because they were good farmers, but again they suffered greatly during the Russian Revolution and in the years following. Thousands of Mennonites died in those years, though a few small groups did choose to defend their property. Most, though, chose the way of Jesus and did not fight back. Many of those who lived through this walked away from everything they owned. That is, and they came to Canada and the United States. Families that were often 10 and 12 in number came with one or two who remained alive. Since coming to Canada and the United States, Mennonites no longer kept to themselves, but began to spread out and live among others. And as a result, we have been influenced by what other Christians believe, and it's changed us somewhat. One of the first influences that has been difficult for Mennonites is how the Bible is used by other Christians. The early Christians and the Mennonites of the 1500s and on believed that Jesus Christ is the Word of God made flesh. His life, his ministry, his death and resurrection are what hold the most authority for us. We also believe that the Spirit of Christ dwells with us to guide us in our decisions so that we can remain faithful to God. So in this way, our faith is more of a relationship than it is a belief in a written word. The Bible is our most treasured book, but the reason we treasure it so much is that it reveals Jesus to us. And Jesus is the one we have chosen to follow both in good times and in suffering. So while some Christians, when faced with a decision, ask, what is the biblical thing to do? Mennonites ask the question, what is the Christ-like thing to do? And there's a big difference in that answer depending on how you read the Bible. The Old Testament has many stories of peaceful relationships, but it also has many stories of violence and domination. Jesus' way, though, was the way of self-sacrifice, the way of suffering, no exceptions, even to the point of death. The second influence that the Mennonite Church has been dealing with is what is called the prosperity gospel. What that means is that people are told if they believe hard enough, if they donate enough money, if their faith is strong enough, then whatever they do, they will prosper and they will not suffer. Many pastors on television have become very rich teaching this way of being Christian, and they tell others that Jesus can make them rich as well. But we argue that this is not the way of Jesus. Jesus did not even have a house of his own, nor any livestock, only very, very few possessions. He lived a life of self-sacrifice and challenged people to live simply so that they could have an abundant spiritual life. The prosperity gospel makes no sense to us when it is compared with the life of Jesus. In fact, it seems to be opposite. In conclusion, I will say that we live in obedience to God by following Jesus. That's how we understand it. Though much of Christianity was really struggling with this at the moment, this almost always brings a degree of suffering and sacrifice, since that is not how the world functions. There are many of us who are praying for a renewal of Christianity to happen. We are praying for a Christianity that looks much more like the self-giving, self-sacrificing way of Jesus, not the power-seeking, dominant, violent ways of being Christian that we see now in some places and in the past. We believe that Christianity focused on following Jesus is a much more beautiful gospel than the world has seen over the last several hundred years. Thank you again for this invitation to speak here this evening. It has been a real privilege. May God bless you all. Amen.
Thank you very much, Pastor, for that glimpse into the history and also the current day and age and sacrifice from your perspective and understanding. I neglected to mention in the beginning that the guest speaker who was supposed to be here, Dr. Huebner, could not be here today because of health issues. He's obviously expressed his remorse that he could not be here to be a part of this program. But let us remember him in our prayers, and let's take a moment of silence right now to remember him, that God gives him a recovery from what is ailing him, and that God gives recovery to all of those who are here today, any of those in the world who are suffering any kinds of difficulties, wherever in the world they may be. And especially let us keep all of those innocent men, women, and children who are suffering around the world in many different war-torn regions, whether they be in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, whether it be those people who are suffering in the hurricanes that have hit the Americas, and wherever else innocent people have suffered. Let us take a moment of silence to remember all of these individuals, please. Before I introduce our next speaker for this evening, one point I wanted to mention, and sometimes people wonder, when we have such gatherings where we have people of such diverse traditions. On one side we have the Christians that we have with us today from many different communities. On the other side we have the Muslims from many different backgrounds who are also here today. And sometimes people ask us that, what commonalities or what similarities do we share that we should share a platform like this together? Because when you look at it from the theological perspective, obviously we have many differences. In the terms of practicality of worship of God, we differ vastly in how we worship God. So why do we have these sorts of gatherings? Why have these dialogues between Muslims and Christians, or Muslims and Jews, or any other groups for that matter? And so I wanted to point to us to, initially just the name of the organization, A Common Word Alberta. And this theme, or the name of this organization, A Common Word, is based upon a verse of the Noble Quran in chapter number 3, which is Surah Al Imran, the family of Imran, which is the family that the Virgin Mary belongs to. And so the chapter is named after her family. In verse number 64, God addresses the Muslims and actually all of humanity by saying the following, where he says, addressing the Prophet Mohammad, God says, "O Prophet, proclaim this message to the people of the scripture, the Jews and the Christians, that let us agree to a proposition that is common to both of us, that we worship none but God, and that we associate no partners with him, and that some of us shall not take others as lords other than God." And then God concludes by saying, but if they turn away, refusing this common word, this common understanding of God, then God tells us to the Muslims and to the believers on a whole, that bear witness that we are the ones who have submitted to the one God. So in actuality, having such gatherings where we can hear one another's opinions, to see where we maybe come to a agreement, and even where we have a divergence of opinions, it should hopefully get us to a common understanding and to have respect for one another. Because in addition, we have a statement from Imam Ali, who was the cousin, the successor to the Prophet Muhammad, where he tells us that people are the enemies of that which they don't know. And so when anybody of any religion, of any dispensation, or people who follow no religion, when we have a fear of the other, where we have a phobia of whether it be Muslims or Christians or Jewish people or people of any background, when we don't know about them, what they follow, what they believe, what they practice, we tend to think of them as the other. And we tend to maybe, marginalize them. We don't want to associate with them. We have a fear of those individuals. But we see from the Islamic perspective that when we get to know one another, yes, we have differences of opinion, but we also have commonalities that we share as being from the line of Prophet Adam. And we have different ways of worship, different understandings, but we also have commonalities. And when we learn of the commonalities, we can at least work together for the betterment of all of humanity. And I think gatherings like this, where we get to meet with one another and hear different opinions, although again, we may not accept them, they may go and they may clash with our understanding of God or of religion, but at least we get to hear from one another and understand other viewpoints, and we actually get to, listen to somebody else speaking, rather than letting the mass media, dictate the agenda, and for, the cable news networks and the internet and social media to pit us against one another. So with that said, and to continue on in this theme this evening of the concept of self-sacrifice for faith communities, as embodied by Imam Hussein and Prophet Jesus, peace be upon both of them, we will now have our second speaker, which is Dr. Mohammad Ali Shomali. Just to give you a brief background of who he is and where he comes from. Dr. Shomali was born in Iran and is a graduate of the Islamic Seminary of the city of Qom. He holds a BA and an MA in Western philosophy from the University of Tehran, and he also earned his doctorate in philosophy from the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. He's currently the scholar in residence and the director of the Islamic Center of England, and also an associate professor at the Islamic College in London in the UK. And he also has many publications which are available in English. They've also been translated into French, Spanish, German, Italian, and many other languages, including Self-Knowledge, a book also called Ethical Relativism, Analysis of the Foundations of Morality, Shia Islam Origins, Faith and Practice, Principles of Jurisprudence, and Introduction to the Methodology of Fiqh, and also is the co-author of a series of books on Shia Muslim and Catholic dialogue. Without further ado, I'd ask Dr. Shomali to come forward to present on his aspect and his understanding of the theme of the concept of self-sacrifice for faith communities as embodied by Imam Hussein and Prophet Jesus.
Peace be with you. Salamun alaikum. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, I am very grateful to God for giving me the blessing of being with you in this city, and I think it is a sign of our deep friendship with our Mennonite friends, and it's almost 17 years that I know the Mennonites, and that is when I went back to Qom after I finished my PhD. So in 2001, we had a couple, Mennonite couples in Qom, which was part of exchange program between MCC and our institute. And then I was involved in the second Shia Mennonite dialogue in 2004, and then afterwards. And then we had lots of programs together, lots of exchange. And I think it was 2011 when, with my wife, we took a group of women from Qom to Winnipeg, and Donna and her husband were our hosts. Then we came to know them more. And then about, maybe it was 2 years ago, that we received initially the invitation for another time, which was of course postponed. And as soon as I heard from Donna that Muslims, Christians together have formed a committee, and they invited me and Professor Harry Hubner to come here, I said I should accept this invitation. When people have united themselves and sent a joint invitation, I cannot say no. So maybe even I didn't think about it 5 minutes. I said, I will come. I was very much hopeful that we would be here with Harry, who is a great friend of mine, but for circumstances that are not in our hands, he was not able to be here, but he's with us in a spirit, and maybe he's watching us because he asked for the link for all the programs, but this program is online, so maybe he's watching us. So we say our greetings to Harry, and we pray for his fast healing. But we have also, instead of Harry, very good friends, Pastor Doug and also Irma and Chris, who are going to join us. They will be here. So thanks to God, it has worked out that still we are able to have this program. Maybe there is a wisdom in what has happened, so we welcome whatever is the plan of God. The topic is a very important topic for both of us, Muslims and Christians. I am grateful to very beautiful and informative presentation that we heard from Pastor Doug, and for sure for Christianity, the self-sacrifice of Jesus is very important, and not as theology, but also a very important part of every person's journey towards God, to be ready to follow that example of Jesus in giving everything back to God. So what I try to do is to give you a little introduction to Islamic understanding of suffering and volunteering or welcoming some kind of suffering in the form of sacrifice. And then I will try to relate it to the prophets and to Imam Hussein in particular, as not a prophet but as an imam who follows the path of the prophets. The Quran tells us that when Adam was asked to go to heaven with Eve, right from the beginning, God warned them about Satan trying to deceive them. And the Quran says, for example, God said, إِنَّ هَذَا لَكُمْ عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. He is an enemy which is clear in his enmity. And you have to be careful, don't listen to him, because he would try to do something with you so that you would lose your position here and you would go out. But the Quran says, لا يخرجنكما من الجنة فتشقى. Don't let Satan send you outside so that you would suffer. So our suffering starts with being away of heaven. So being on this planet, being this type of life that we experience, is mixed with suffering. We cannot have a life totally free from pain or suffering in this planet. The Quran also says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. We have made human beings in pain and in difficulties. So whether we like it or not, we are going through different stages of ease and difficulties, health and illness, rich and poverty, being welcomed or being rejected. There are lots of ups and downs in this life. And we as believers should be ready for these changes. We should not lose our hope. We should not lose our faith when we go through these changes. Sometimes we read in the Bible and also in other places that some people have, for example, the story of Job, when he was suffering, some people thought that if he suffers, it's because he has done something bad. Some people think that anyone who is suffering must have committed a sin or mistake, and they try to blame them. But this is not true. Yes, sometimes people suffer because they have not been careful, they haven't planned things properly, they didn't work hard, they were not moral, but this is not explaining everything. You can be doing things very well. You can be a very good person who also works hard and plans everything, consults, takes advice, studies before making a decision, but still you may suffer. There is no reason to think that whoever suffers has done something wrong. Indeed, we have something more than this. Not only suffering is not a sign of being a bad person, but we have even something more in Islamic literature, that actually the people who are closer to God, they should expect more suffering. This is a higher level of suffering. There is a poem in Farsi, and the poet says, whoever is closer to God in this feast in which lovers of God are together, whoever is closer to God, he would be given the wine of suffering more. So imagine, because in the mystical literature, wine is a symbol, an icon for love. So whoever is closer to God, jam bala bishtarash midahand. They give him more of the wine of suffering. To the extent that we find in hadith, Islamic narrations, that ashaddu nas bala'an al-anbiya. The greatest problems happen to the prophets, messengers. ثُمَّ الْأَمْثَلُ فَالْأَمْثَلُ. Then whoever were closer to the prophets in rank, then they were suffering the second. So anyone who is in a high level of love for God, high level of piety, should be expecting that somehow he would face some difficulties and suffering and pain. This is very natural. And among the prophets, our prophet is a clear example that he suffered a lot, to the extent that he says, "Ma udhiya nabiyyun mithla ma udhit." No prophet was annoyed and hurt like me. He suffered a lot. If you know the history of the life of the prophet, you know that he lost his father before he was born. Soon he lost his mother when he was a young child. He was under the care of the grandfather. Then he lost his grandfather. He had very good wife, but then he lost his wife. And when he started his mission, then he had to go through lots of hardship. His followers were tortured, were killed. For 3 years they were under embargo and sanction. No one was selling Muslims anything. No one was even allowed to take money from them and give them food, let alone just helping them. So lots of difficulties. And then in Medina, lots of attacks against Muslims. So he suffered a lot. Then there were hypocrites inside Medina who pretended to be Muslims, but they were not Muslims. Even they tried to assassinate the Prophet. They built a mosque in Medina to trouble the Prophet. So he went through lots of hardship. Why? Because the position that he is going to occupy is a position that cannot be reached without going through difficulties and hardship. So we have this idea that those who are closer to God, they may suffer more. They should expect more suffering to come. They shouldn't volunteer for suffering. I don't say, okay, I go outside and look for troubles and problems. I don't volunteer, but I should be prepared. I should be expecting that problems would come, because we are people who have a higher aim. We are not interested only in having a, reasonable, worldly life. We are aiming at something higher, and this world is not capable of offering everything. We need to be getting a spiritual energy, and a spiritual energy, I am afraid, wouldn't come by eating and drinking and sleeping and going for holidays. It comes with hardship. It comes with challenges. Sometimes I say, if you want to have, for example, commandos, you cannot have commandos by giving them 5-star holidays. You have to send them to forests and jungles and say, no food, no drink, no comfortable bed. You have to be here, you have to look after yourself. Then those of you who manage to pass all these challenges successfully, then we may accept you as people who are qualified. So this world cannot be a comfortable place for the people who want to aim at something higher than this world. If you want something higher than this world, so you should find that this world is too little for you. You should find that there is, limited space for you. So you have to then try to go higher. But if everything here is perfect and you have very comfortable life, then you will think that why I cannot be always here? Why I should think about something more? So this is about suffering. Much more to say, but very briefly, it's about suffering. But what I want to say is that there are people who have even a higher understanding of the opportunities that God has given humanity in this world. And in particular, we are talking about prophets, messengers, saints. I would like to refer to the beginning of a dua that we have. We Shia Muslims, in addition to our daily ritual prayers that we have, we also have regular supplications that we recite. And many times we try to do them together. So one prayer that it's very common for the Shia to recite on Friday, every Friday morning, is we call Dua Nudba. And this prayer is actually called Nudba because Nudba means lamenting, crying, means we remember the tragic events that happened to the saints. And because of that, we also try to have empathy with them and to connect to them. The beginning, the very first lines of this prayer is about messengers. Allahumma lakal hamdu ala ma jara bihi qada'uk fi awliyaika alladhina istakhlastahum li nafsika wa dinik. O God, all praise is due to you because of the decree that you have made with respect to your saints, your friends, that you chose them for yourself. Istakhlastahum linafsika wa dinik. So there are people that not only they are pious and therefore they go through these challenges and try to be patient and try to, face these challenges with hope and patience. No, there is something more. There are people that God has chosen them for himself and his religion. Istakhlastahum linafsika wa dinik. So there are people who have a mission from God. So for these people, then it's not only suffering, it's also readiness for sacrifice. إذ اخترت لهم جزيل ما عندك من النعيم المقيم والثواب الجزيل وشرطت عليهم الزهد في درجات هذه الدنيا الدنية وزخرفها وزبرجها. You chose them for yourself. We believe that God chose Jesus for himself. God chose Moses for himself. God chose Abraham for himself. Because God saw in them something which was very special. And that is, in my understanding, the fact that they were selfless. They had no ego. They were not thinking about something for themselves in contrast to others. These were perfect mirrors reflecting the light of God. If there is any ego in me, I cannot reflect God completely. I would reflect myself. So, God chose them for himself, for his message, and there was a condition. وَشَرَطَّ عَلَيْهِمُ الزُّهْدِ. You made a condition that they should not be attached to this world, this worldly life. Something that we find very clear in Islamic scripture about Jesus is that Jesus was an icon, a symbol for zuhd, for not being attached to this world. He had as we just heard, we also have the same idea. He had very, very simple life. Of course, just to have simple life is not a perfect, reason, because there are people who have simple life, but maybe they always dream of having a very luxurious life. But Jesus chose to have simple life, not that he didn't afford. Jesus was not attached to this world. Abraham was not attached to this world. And then there is something very deep, theological point in this supplication, that we say to God, when you knew that they are going to be loyal to this condition, then you brought them closer to you and you promoted them. علمت منهم الوفاء به فقبلتهم وقربتهم وقدمت لهم الذكر العلي. So when God in eternity knows what response these people give, so from before even their birth, He praises them and He raises their position. Because God knows in eternity what type of response this person is going to give. So there are people that God has chosen them for Himself. And these people give everything to God. Not only when some tragedies happen, they are patient. No, they actively look for opportunities to give, to offer what they have, so that they can bring more good to this world. They can reflect the light of God more. And an example that we have is Imam Hussein. For us, Imam Hussein is a perfect example of offering whatever you have to God. Of course, whatever we have is from God, and we should acknowledge that we are giving Him back His own trust. It's not that we have something from our own pocket and we are giving to God. We cannot really give anything to God unless we have already received from Him. But it's very important to be ready for giving everything that you have to God. I would like to refer to a poem in Farsi about the story of Imam Hussein and love. This is a very famous poem, and interestingly, this poem is made by a king, Nasir-ad-Din Shah, one of the kings of Iran from Qajar dynasty. Before Pahlavi dynasty, we had Qajar dynasty. And this king was a person who also had the habit of making poem. I am not endorsing what he did, but this poem is beautiful. And he had a love for imams. So he says, عشق بازی کار هر شیاد نیست. این شکار دام هر صیاد نیست. He says, to be a lover is not something that every liar can do. Many people claim, you say, I love. But it says, this is not something that every person can do. This is not the prey that every hunter can hunt. It's very difficult to hunt love. عاشقی را قابلیت لازم است. طالب حق را حقیقت لازم است. If you want to truly love, you need to have qualifications. If you want to be truthful, you have to match and resonate with the truth. It's not that every person can say, I am with the truth. I am a lover of God. No, it's not easy. Then he says, عشق از معشوق اول سر زند تا به عاشق جلوه دیگر دهد. This is very much related to the issue of grace that we also have in Christianity and in Islam. So how someone becomes a lover of God? He says love starts with the beloved first endearing himself to the lover. So the beloved tries to draw the attention of the lover to himself. And then love starts. But this process of drawing the attention of the lover can get so high that the lover forgets himself completely. تا به حدی که برد هستی از او. A true lover no longer thinks about himself, just thinks about the beloved. In Farsi mystical literature, we have couples who are examples of love. Of course, it's not it looks like romantic love, but it's examples for love for God. And one case is Layla and Majnun. And it is said that Majnun had so much of love for Layla, the woman, that when he was killed and his blood came out of the body, the blood wrote Layla. Means in every drop of the blood of the lover was the impact of the beloved. And again, about the issue of suffering, it is said that one day Layla was giving food out, and every person was going and taking a container so that they receive some food. So Majnun also went and stood in the queue with his, pot, and hopefully he also can get food from his beloved. And normally the beloved also doesn't show that much attention. One thing common is that the beloved normally, to add to your thirst, doesn't show that much attention, tries to ignore you. So Layli used to give food to everyone, but as soon as Majnun, who was her lover, gave his pot, threw it away and broke it. And everyone started complaining, Majnun, this man. Majnun means mad, but he was mad because of love. Said, why you so much love this lady? Look, she gives food to everyone, but when it comes to you, breaks your container. But Majnun said, no. You think her rejection is because she doesn't love me. But actually, why she only rejected me? Why she only threw away my pot? گرش با دیگران بود میلی چرا سبوی من بشکست لیلی. And this has mystical meaning, means suffering comes because you are chosen. You are not ordinary. So, he says here, when love comes, by drawing the attention of the lover, then the lover would no longer think about himself. He's totally focused on the beloved. Then he says, شاهد این مدعا خواهی اگر بر حسین و حالت او کن نظر. Now, if you want an example, look at Hussein and his condition. روز عاشورا در آن میدان عشق کرد رو را جانب سلطان عشق. On the day of Ashura, which was a battle of love, he says it was a battle of love. And there were two key players. Everything else was on the side. The two key players was Imam Hussein and God, the lover and the beloved. So in that day, Hussein ibn Ali faced God, looked at God, and he said, Barilaha, in saram, in paykaram, in alamdar rashidu, in akbaram. Basically, he said to God, I have brought to you everything that I have. not only I have brought you myself and I am giving you my life, I have brought my dear brothers, my children, my nephews. I have brought everything for you. Then he says, پس خطاب آمد ز حق کی شاه عشق ای حسین ای یک تاز راه عشق. Then there was a reply from God. So when he said to God that I have brought everything that I had, and this is when everyone except him and his little newborn baby who was just 6 months old, they were left. Every man was killed except Imam Hussein and this baby, and of course there was Imam Zainul Abidin who was ill. But 72 people were martyred. So a call came from God that, O Hussein, O the one who is on this journey of love, you love me, but if you can remove the curtain, you would see I love you more than you love me. غم مخور که من خریدار توام مشتری بر جنس بازار توام. You know, a lover has only one concern. A lover offers everything, but has one concern. Are these going to be accepted? You know, Lady Zainab, after Imam Hussein was killed, said to God, "O God, please accept from us this sacrifice. Taqabbal minna." They were not concerned about how much we have offered. No. Their concern is this acceptable? This sacrifice is acceptable or not? So, God says, "Qam makhur." Don't be sad. I am going to buy whatever you have brought for me. هرچه بودت داده ای در راه ما مرحبا صد مرحبا خود هم بیا. You have given everything that you had and we accept it. But now it is time that you yourself also come. But God says, خود بیا که می کشم من ناز تو عرش و فرشم جمله پا انداز تو. I am going to put a red carpet in front of my throne for you because you have given everything. There is a story that one of the scholars, Allamiya Bahrul Ulum, is very respected scholar. It is said that he was wondering why so much reward is promised to those who visit the shrine of Imam Hussein. Maybe our Christian brothers and sisters know that every year millions of Shia go to Karbala, to Iraq, and visit the shrine of Imam Hussein, especially on the 40th day after the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, which is Arba'in, which would be in about 20 days. Millions of people go for pilgrimage. But throughout the year this is going on, but this is one occasion that millions of people go together. And we have many, many hadiths about reward, great reward for this. So this great alim was surprised why so much reward. Even in some cases, for example, we have on the day of Arafah, God first looks at the pilgrims of Imam Hussein before looking at the pilgrims in Arafat. Then he had a conversation with someone who seemed to be Imam Mahdi, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif. And Imam alayhi salam mentioned one example, and I'm going to finish my talks very soon with this example. And this shows loyalty and thankfulness of God. You know, in Quran, we have this concept that God is very grateful. God is not only Shakir, He is Shakur. He's very grateful. Once we had discussion with some Christian friends in Qom, and they said, we have not come across this concept of God being grateful, but they were very interested. So we have this concept that God is also grateful. So when you do something good, God is grateful. So the story that Imam, according to this story, mentioned is this. Suppose a king. There was a king who went with his people for hunting. So in the past, it was very common that kings went for hunting. Even they had sometimes special places for hunting. No one else could hunt there. So he went for hunting and saw an animal, like for example a deer or whatever, and wanted to hunt. And said to his people, leave me alone. I want to hunt by myself. So animal ran away, so he followed the animal, and then he got lost. Now he's not able to find his people. It's very far from the city. He is hungry and thirsty and is going to die. Then after some time finds a tenant. There is an old man, an old woman inside the desert living there. So he goes there and says, I am lost. I have nothing, to eat. I have nothing to eat. I have no water, anything. This old man and woman had only one goat. They had nothing except one goat, and they were taking milk and using. They slaughtered this goat for the king without knowing he is king, just because of hospitality. So they slaughtered the goat, made food for the king, looked after him, and he became all right, and they showed him the path. And then he said, if you anytime in future need something, come to town and ask for my name, and I will help you. After some time, because they had nothing left, they had only this goat, and they had killed the goat, sacrificed it. So they went to the city and said, come and ask me for help. So when they went to the city, they mentioned his name, said, this is the king. So they took them to the palace, and then they met the king and said, we are in need. This is the peak of the story. So the king was there and his advisors and ministers. So the king said, these two people helped me when I was starving and dying. They had one goat slaughtered for me. What should I do for them? One person said, they gave you one goat, give them one goat. One said, no, they gave one goat, but you are king, you should give them 20, 30. The king said, no. They gave me everything that they had, and if I give them everything that I have to them, I have just done justice. but they gave me without being in debt to me. I am in debt to them. So Allamiyya Bahrul Ulum then realized why Imam Hussein is so much revered by God. Why people like Jesus are so much revered. Because they gave everything that they had to God. They didn't save something for future. Said, okay, maybe in future I need something. Everything that they had, with joy, they offered. And this then would make your relation with God another type of relation. Then God also would give you everything. God would elevate your position, and then you would be able to speak on behalf of God. You would be able to guide people towards God. You would be able to be perfect light for people to move towards God. I hope God also find us also valuable to choose us as His agents to bring light to this world and in this age. And we should be, of course, prepared to go through some sacrifice. We cannot expect everything be perfect and then we would be bringing light to the world. We need sacrifice. But I hope our sacrifice would be not in something that would affect our relation with God. Our sacrifice would be something worldly, something temporary, and in return we gain something permanent and some special relation with God. Thank you very much.